Again, thanks so much everyone for joining us. My name is Nick and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Tonight, though, we are thrilled to welcome Joseph Hahn in conversation with Gene Kwak, talking about Joseph's debut novel, Nuclear Family. Joseph Hahn is an editor for the West region of Joyland magazine and a recipient of the Kundiman Fellowship in Fiction. His writing has appeared in Nat Fruit, Catapult, Pleiades magazine, Platypus Press Shorts, and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. In Nuclear Family, things are looking up for Mr. and Mrs. Cho. Their dream of franchising their Korean plate lunch restaurants across Hawaii seems within reach. Their daughter, Grace, is busy finishing her senior year of college and working for her parents, while her older brother, Jacob, just moved to Seoul to teach English. But when a viral video shows Jacob trying and failing to cross the Korean demilitarized zone, nothing can protect the family from suspicion and the restaurant from waning sales. No one knows that Jacob has been possessed by the ghost of his lost grandfather, who feverishly wishes to cross the divide and find the family he left behind in the north. As Jacob is detained by the South Korean government, Mr. and Mrs. Cho fear their son won't ever be able to return home. Nuclear Family is an offering that aches with histories inherited and reunions missed, asking how we heal in the face of what we forgot and who we remember. Han will be joined in conversation by Gene Kwak, author of the novel Go Home, Ricky. His work has been published in the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Rumpus, Lit Hub, Wigleaf, and Electric Literature. Today's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Lastly, support Joseph and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his book from us. A link to buy Nuclear Family will be shared in the chat a couple of times tonight, along with a link to Gene's book as well. Joseph and Gene, thank you so much for joining us, and we're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you, Powell's, and thank you, Gene. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you. Huge fan of Go Home, Ricky. Yeah, I feel like I wrote this book in order to meet you, and I very much see Nuclear Family as a companion text to a novel like Go Home, Ricky, this burgeoning literature by Korean American writers, writing, I guess, what you would call slacker fiction. But yeah, really excited to be in conversation with you. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the novel. Lately, I've been reading from the opening chapter, which follows and introduces us to Taewoo, the ghost grandfather that ends up possessing his grandson, whom he's never met, but whom he uses because he requires a physical form to cross the spiritual barrier that has manifested at the Korean DMZ, preventing him from returning back home to North Korea and preventing him from reuniting with his family that he left behind during the Korean War. The excerpt that I'll be reading comes later in the book, and it details the attempted crossing that ends up making the news and having ramifications for the Cho family back in Hawaii, and introduces us to the scene of possession. The South Korean tour guide says you are passing the Freedom Village, Taesongdong, where villagers were allowed to return after the armistice despite the danger. He says they lived under curfew and constant threat, some villagers being kidnapped and taken into the north. However, unlike Kijongdong on the other side, which amounted to an empty propaganda village with no one actually living there. The Freedom Village was supposedly thriving. You've walked all along the DMZ, from Ganghwa to Gosong County, and stumbled upon trash and junk, military waste harvested for metals that peddlers traded so steel could be melted into I-beams and bars for South Korean buildings. You've witnessed dead villagers, the ones who weren't so lucky, guide their progeny when landmines lay in wait across wetlands and rice paddies, some encased in plastic lasting 100 years, some encased in steel that could launch and explode shrapnel, the force of their hands, like a powerful wind urging their kin to take a different step. When you arrive at Camp Boniface, an American soldier takes over the tour. He leads you into Ballinger Hall, where you sit through a mandatory PowerPoint providing you with a basic history of the Korean War and the DMZ. The American soldier tells you the North attacked first, and it was only through the valiant and courageous effort of the United States and the United Nations that South Korea could be protected as they pushed the aggressors back. You yawn. You raise your hand, but they mistake you for stretching. You keep your hand up. The soldier asks if you have a question, and you decide to say no. You stop yourself from being disruptive so you can correct the American who unintentionally left out the important details, like how the United States had promised Korea's sovereignty after World War II and instead chose to occupy the peninsula as a strategic military location, a matter of convenience to Colonels Charles H. Bonesteel and Dean Rusk, who wanted to keep Seoul in their zone by pointing to the 38th parallel on a map to divide Korea in two. How the United States perceived communism as an ever-growing threat and thus made Korea a stage for democracy until it became grounds for an international fight between superpowers rather than a civil war, grounds for the massacre of citizens they considered suspect in a war before the official war, leaving 3 million Koreans dead. Freedom this, freedom that, freedom bridge, forever talk of protecting South Korea's freedom, which only meant being free to a certain point. Were you really free when you only lived in half of a country rather than the whole? When you're told South Korea's freedom means the United States is free to stay, and you're free to be stuck where you are, free to forget, meaning free to move on? After signing a waiver acknowledging your safety is not guaranteed in the event of a hostile enemy act, you return to the bus. You pass by a golf course, which at one point was named the world's most dangerous golf course, a status conferred given its proximity to the DMZ, not for being located on a campsite belonging to the United States, which has the world's most dangerous military. In the joint security area, the bus parks at the rear of the Freedom House. You can hear people murmuring in excitement, fingers tapping on chairs. You are ordered to file out of the bus and climb the stairs to the Freedom House in 2 lines. The American soldier reminds you about the rule against pointing or making provocative gestures. You walk through the building and exit at the front, where you find the light blue military Armistice Commission buildings and Pamugak, a 3-story building on the other side in North Korea. You wait on the top steps of the Freedom House. The bus group is allowed inside the building, only 20 at a time. People already have their phones out, ready to take photos with the ROK soldiers inside the MAC building. The ROK soldiers planted outside, facing North Korea, resemble statues, but you know they will react quickly. The American soldiers tell you the soldiers are standing in a taekwondo position, wearing sunglasses to intimidate the North Koreans. You ponder if the ROK soldiers trained themselves to take naps without anyone noticing. There would be an ROK soldier standing guard at the back entrance of the MAC building, so there is less of a chance you would get through this way. The only way you can get across the military demarcation line is right through the middle. You will have to make a run for it. Your group is up first to go inside. A line starts forming. You try to lift your leg, but can't move. Your foot is stuck. Your knees start to bend, and now you're crouching. You are heavy. Your head is turning back to the Freedom House, and your body is shifting as well. You're trying to leave. The American soldier tells you to move along, but you reach for your shoelaces and tell him you'll be a moment. You raise a trembling hand and slap yourself as hard as you can. You bring your hand back down and push against the steps to spring back up. You lunge forward and catch your balance. You limp forward slowly, as if you're walking underwater. Your left shoulder keeps jerking backward, trying to make you turn around. You resist. You're at the end of the line, which is already beginning to enter the building. There's the ROK soldier standing at the corner of the building, another in the middle. You have to make it past them and leap across the concrete slab, or at least halfway through. Actually, it doesn't matter if the body doesn't make it to the other side. You just have to slip through the barrier. You have to make it back. Why was the barrier there to begin with? When you died, why did you have to remain on this side? The barrier remained in your life and in your life after, but neither amounted to much. With all the life you had in you, the life borrowed, the life you made your own because you wanted this life to carry you so badly, you run. No one expected you would. You knocked down one guard and the next. You had so much strength then, you could have charged into each blue building and knocked them down too. The divide in sight. Then your shortest, greatest fall. Thanks so much.
Great job, Joseph. I was about to yell, but like I feel like it would go, it would just mess up some people's listening experience. Before we get into questions, I just want to say, y'all, like honestly, I love this book so much. I have multiple copies. And I'm only getting more. I'm just collecting them. I'm just going from indie bookstore to indie bookstore collecting more. I'm just gonna start handing them out to family and friends like hotcakes. It's so, I mean, it hits me on so many different levels, emotionally, sentence level wise, things that are going on in the paragraphs that we'll talk a little bit about today. But the other quick thing I want to mention before we get into our questions is that I've also been listening to Joseph's interviews, reading the interviews. There was a great one that went up on the Rumpus a couple days ago. And honestly, y'all, like, you should listen to and read them all because Joseph is a fucking genius. And and I sat through the Q&A with Crystal Hana Kim, another friend, another incredible Korean American writer, and was like almost in tears at the stuff that they were talking about. So read the book, but also go through the interviews as well. Today we only have obviously, you know, so much time, and so there's a couple questions I have. Joseph, do you just want to like maybe start off and talk about like a general kind of what the process of creating the book was? You know, at what point did you know like, all right, this is a novel, and this is like the novel that I can, you know, definitely sort of put X amount of years into, and then I'm going to then query and try to get out there. Was there a moment like a passage, or just, you know, how was that process for you?
Yeah, a lot of people have been asking me, you know, why a ghost story? Why write about a magical realist story? And, you know, why write about the DMZ? And it really comes down to how every Korean American story is a ghost story. And I really didn't have to do too much thinking with regard to the premise because of the ways in which we are haunted by these legacies that continue to exist, that endure and keep enduring as long as the Korean War continues without a peace treaty. But in my having to learn and return home, attempting to return to understand where my father's family, side of the family came from in the North, I came up against many barriers and blocks in writing. And the biggest barrier of them all was the Korean DMZ. And anytime I tried to write Korean characters or Korean American stories, I returned constantly to that question: why is that barrier there? And what is keeping Korea divided? As far as the writing process, I had to confront the page, and at times it felt like I was staring directly at the heart and face of the Korean DMZ. I was being told not to write. I was told to move on and forget. So it felt like I was writing against the blank page, against forgetting, indifference, silence, all of these forces which I believe continue to shape our relationship to the Korean Peninsula as a divided country. And it really felt like I was banging my head against the wall, constantly trying to figure out, how am I going to break through this story, break through this impossible barrier to show what is possible, or what is made possible when we attempt to dare to imagine crossings, and dare to question, why would someone care to want to cross and go into North Korea? And that goes back to how countless families carry this desire, and they carry this desire with them until death. And it's our responsibility to carry it for them afterward. So that really informed how I, explored these themes of how we embody history and feel these separations, and locate them within ourselves before we have to point to a map and say, this is the source of the confusion, the question of this constant state of peril and unknowing that seems to condition our lives as Koreans in diaspora. And so I wrote the book to take readers to the DMZ, as I hope to convey in my reading.
That's amazing. That's amazing. There's so many facets of this book that I want to delve into, but obviously we only have so much time. One thing that really jumped out to me though was the fact that the Jo family, they owned and worked at this Korean plate lunch spot. And first off, I want to commend you on really nailing the feeling of working and living in that environment, because I know I grew up, I was one of those little kids in the back of a restaurant, except we didn't have, tablets or whatever. So I was literally laying on a bed, a bed with dirty newspapers, and they're stare at the ceiling, Gene, until lunch rush is over. But I know that lifestyle, and you nailed it. And I also thought you really did an incredible job of also highlighting how the labor can sort of break people down physically and emotionally. It's a grind, right? And so can you maybe just talk about why it was important to put the family at that particular, location? What inspired that?
Yeah, the Korean diaspora in Hawaii is a small community, and a lot of the reason why Korean families immigrate to Hawaii is to envision that their children will obtain American citizenship and an education that will then leverage them to on the path toward prestigious university and school. Yeah, taking Hawaii as a leaping point for their ambitions that they could not realize, and it also becomes a site for their sacrifice. And yeah, Korean communities are primarily understood through the plate lunch in Hawaii. Like any mention of, oh, you're Korean? My favorite place to get michun is Gina's or Yummy's, or have you had it there or here? And I think that goes back to how in offering food, Korean communities and families are very much offering themselves, and this extends to our stories and our culture being made more consumable and palatable to certain tastes that kind of allied, what makes our being in the U.S. possible, and connecting that to the point of the usual saying when it comes to immigrant communities in the diaspora is, we are here because you were there. U.S. intervention and occupation precipitated our having to leave and to aspire to succeed under global capitalism, which is not too different from, South Korea as a hyper-capitalist state where many families are struggling behind this allure of that we're all so glamorized and drawn to. And yeah, it's they also, the Cho family puts so much of their expectations and burdens on their children to carry on a legacy that they hope will continue beyond them. And the restaurant becomes maybe their primary home and the framework for which they can conceptualize family as it may extend to their customers. But that only goes so far, because as it's conveyed in the novel, they start to turn against the Cho family once they suspect these allegiances to North Korea through Jacob's Crossing.
That's everything you say. I'm like, I have another follow-up question that I want, but we'd be here for like a week just like dissecting the incredible layers of the book. One quick follow-up question though, because the whole plate lunch thing, I'm vaguely familiar with it. I actually just looked it up. We have one on the outskirts of Omaha where I'm at, but it's actually over in Bellevue, which is like the military, right by the military base. So it makes sense. I just found out like that it's like a plate lunch spot. The name is incredible. It's called Korean Grill Egg Roll the number 2 Go. That's the whole title of the place. But it's supposed to be pretty good. A bunch of ajumas and Haimani's like cooking up food. But quick follow-up is, what is your plate lunch like? Do you have your go-to kind of order?
Well, I think I don't even know if I like michun, but I get it all the time. It's thin, flimsy, it's sweet, savory. There's this semblance of excess that, and a plate lunch, a regular size, can really be 4 servings if you spread it out. And there's the sense that you're getting more than you pay for. And I feel like that really just speaks to general attitudes when it comes to Hawaii and traveling here, and also the US's attitude toward Hawaii as a place in which they can get more than they pay for, which is absolutely true regarding how much they pay for their leasing of Hawaiian lands. to use for target practice and to train for war, with, eyeing toward and pivoting toward North Korea and China and across the Pacific, as really, Oahu is known as a gathering place, and the plate lunch reflects the various influences of immigrant communities and the foods they bring. Each community has an entree that is a contribution to the mixed plate metaphor that is multicultural, liberal, multicultural Hawaii, and michan is the Korean offering. But you get your selection of panchan, and with weak kimchi that's pretty bland. But you can also get a scoop of mac salad with your kimchi, or mayo potatoes, which I can't help but really loving. And that, I'm a monster and I pour hot sauce over everything, and it's the perfect hangover food. But yeah, it's meant to be like a table full of food all in one place for your convenience. And we are also so conveniently accepted, if only for what we have to offer in our palatable and packageable culture that has been reshaped to fit these palettes. And yeah, we can't help but love the mayonnaise, I think, and that kind of inspired why I thought, that's why I think people keep bringing up Guy Fieri when they talk about my book. He's the mayonnaise in the novel.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor.
He's the hook, and we got you there. We got you in.
Yeah. That's great. So one thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and talking to other writers, other AAPI writers, other just sort of like immigrant writers, children of immigrants, is this notion of, when we're writing, thinking both as a writer and a reader, like, what do we translate? What do we and what do we have to explain? Right? Like the romanization of Korean has like always been kind of tricky.
Yeah.
Right. They're like these like official systems, but also we can just kind of make up the rules, as fiction writers.
Yeah.
But then also even like in what we explain, I know that I was talking to a couple of different writers who were, I think there's been this push amongst up and coming writers to be like, I'm not going to explain anything. Like, we have Google, you figure it out. I know the Hawaiian writer Kauai Strong Washburn had a great quote about like, I'm not going to explain it to you. Shakespeare was writing stuff and y'all figured it out before Google. So like, you can look up the references if you really want to know.
Yeah.
But I also think there is something important in the explaining, and we as writers have to make those decisions about what we explain and sort of what we leave. And yeah, I kind of just wanted to like sort of pick your brain a little bit about like, what was your guiding principle in thinking about like, what do I explain? What do I just sort of leave as is? And how that kind of connects to your like intended audience as well.
Yeah, I always keep a diasporic Korean audience at the forefront of my mind whenever I write. So when I write, I don't want to feel like that audience can suspect that I'm not writing for them by having to go into explanation mode, as you said, or defining my terms, because we don't need to do that when we're among one another. And our use of Korean just comes up as naturally as I hoped it would in the novel, in dialogue, as it's romanized. And yeah, like we, in romanizing our language and having non-Korean readers, attempt to phonetically speak our language in their head and to feel it in their mouths, I feel like that very much replicates, my own experience having to work through and sound out English words and the struggle and anxiety that comes with whether I'm understanding its meaning or saying it correctly. Non-Korean readers should wrestle with our language. And so I also resisted what is, I think, a great impulse to not italicize and overemphasize non-English words as they are romanized. But another thing that I kept in mind is I wanted to replicate the rhythm and syntax of how I hear Korean from Korean folks that I know, in how it's transmuted into English as as it appears as dialogue on the page in scenes. And it's not like I wanted to be like Appa said in Korean. I wrote from the assumption that in the story world, diegetically, these characters are speaking Korean to one another. On the page, we are getting the translation or the Korean transmuted into prose in this particular space, which happens to be a narrative written in English. And I think a writer that really inspired my understanding of how to get that rhythm of Korean characters speaking in Korean, but replicating it as English is E.J. Ko. And she does a lot of that in The Magical Language of Others, in writing her and translating her mother's letters, but also in the scenes where the EJ character is interacting with her mother. And in reading the English, I can hear and attempt to translate it and hear the Korean. And that very much became a foundation for how I approached conveying these relations through language, and also the barriers, especially when it comes to the Jacob chapters and when he speaks or cannot speak Korean with his mother's side of the family in South Korea.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, EJ's work is so incredible too. Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna have to talk more personally about this too,
Yeah,
because this is like something I've been grappling with so much these last, yeah, for sure, these last couple of years. I want to pivot a little bit, and then we'll hopefully have enough time for some questions. Feel free, y'all, to throw your questions in the Q&A if you haven't already. But I do want to pivot a little bit into some of the stylistic uses of like text. I don't want to give anything away because I think the reader should confront them on the page, because some of, like, when you come across some of them, they're just so beautiful in the moment, or like, take you maybe a little bit out of the reading experience of like, remember, like, oh yeah, I am reading a text or whatever. And so I don't want to necessarily get into some of those details, although you can if you want. Yeah. But I just thought that like playing with the form and the text was so beautiful. Did you always know that you were going to do that? And like, did you have any kind of influences or inspirations, maybe even literary or otherwise, for being sort of playful and inventive with the text on the page?
Yeah, actually, all of those formal choices came during the editorial process after the book sold. And it was really working through and refining my vision for how, or the language around how I write about the spiritual border and the DMZ, where I realized I had to take it further and push boundaries. And I felt like my writing journey in completing this book was very analogous to Teo's journey in attempting to cross and break through the DMZ. And I thought of the novel as also a wall of text, and how there needed to be spaces for experimentation and the pushing up against genre, playing with space, And yeah, concrete poetry, the work of Dan Choi, Hardly War, and DMZ Colony, that totally just unlocked my imagination and gave me the lexicon I needed to think about what I was doing at the aesthetic level in writing about the DMZ as a fictitious, imaginary, and constructed border. And what better place than a novel to speak back against the fiction that Korea is a divided country, and to also speak to the legacy of how the peninsula was inscribed with the 38th parallel, just right down in the middle. As I mentioned in my reading, two colonels just opened a map and found the exact middle spot and said, that's convenient for us to keep Seoul on this side. And such a choice has such lasting, manifold consequences and violences that reverberate across our imaginaries, across every map as it's repeated, and as the world can point back and locate Korea and see that it's two countries rather than one. And that divide has been such a disruptive force that I wanted to replicate that feeling of disruption and disorientation on the page when we come up against section breaks, which I will just outright say, because no one seems to be saying it, is the 38th parallel in miniature as a section break. And if you pay attention, there's a puzzle of sorts that if you notice and keep paying attention to that section break, by the end, you may be in for a surprise. I'll just say, bring on a magnifying glass.
Wait, no one's mentioned that? No one's mentioned that at all?
Not really.
See,
but yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Also I was reading Memorial, which also has frequent use of section breaks. And they kind of look like text bubbles to me, like pauses, and it felt like the disappearing connection between Mike and Benson as they tried to navigate the relationship, across countries. And I really felt the separation between them within their respective chapters and across their sections. And my first chapter was actually just one long block of text. And then after I read Memorial, I was like, that's not the reading experience of this first chapter doesn't reflect the challenges that Teo is facing, and thus the reader is facing by attempting to move through this book. There are all these stops and starts and barriers that we need to push through.
Yeah, we're running out of time a little bit just because I want to give time to the reader questions, but I just want to say, I'm surprised no one's brought that up, because it was blatantly obvious to me what was going on there. Although one funny thing was that there was a small, I think the first version of the book that I was reading, there was a small, maybe just, it wasn't even a printing error, but how sometimes, there are little dots or marks on the page that will somehow get printed onto the page. And there was a little squiggle that looked exactly like the section break on one page working its way down the page. And I was like, does this mean something? Is this an error? Then I was trying to read too deeply into what that might have meant. But I just want to say real quick, because I have so many more questions, but I want to make sure that we have time for audience questions. That y'all, the book is so good. Honestly, from a structural standpoint to a sentence level standpoint to the humor and the depth. I had a whole question too about paragraphs. There are paragraphs in there that start in concrete ways and flip in time in the middle of the and location in the middle of the paragraph. And it's honestly, Joseph, it's inspiring me to be a better writer. You know what I mean? I'm I gotta get off my ass and do something.
Wow,
Yeah, like
that's
it's like
thank you.
I need to be better. You know what I mean? So I think we should just maybe real quickly finish off, and then we can open it up to like audience Q&A. Um, just about like, I just know that you're, and I think we're of the same mind that we like to kind of like, I don't know, appreciate our fellow writers and sort of like, you know, highlight other writers. So I just wanted to like give a little bit of time to maybe other AAPI writers or Korean American writers that you feel like people in the audience should know their work. Yeah, I don't know any names that you want to throw out there, or books, or
Yeah, I live for the work of future Korean American books that come out every year. It's the one thing that makes me happy to be alive, knowing that we are, you know, part of this greater literary tradition, and, you know, to write Nuclear Family and have the occasion to speak with you and put it next to Go Home Ricky, next to Pizza Girl by Gene Kwak, add it to the top shelf where I keep every Korean American book or text that I've acquired over the years, because, you know, these are our contemporaries and forebearers, and, you know, they nourish me. They stand on the altar in my imagination every time I sit at the desk. You know, and every year we think like a lot of, you know, there's a lot of Korean American writing coming out, but really it's a handful amongst the vast number of books that come out every year. And you know, just this year, The Evening Hero, um, Marie Myung-ok Lee, one of the founders of the Asian American Writers Workshop. Upcoming this year, Which Side Are You On by Ryan Lee Wong, which I'm super excited about, coming out with Catapult. And yeah, it's just an honor to be part of the slate that I've looked forward to every year and anticipated. And next year, no less, is going to be super amazing with a new book by Matthew Salesses, Jimin Han's new book, Gina Chung novel Sea Change, Chinu Chung, Flux coming out with Melville House, Y/N by Esther Yi, Astra House Books. I'm super excited about that one. Next year is going to be absolutely amazing and a lot to look forward to. And I'm excited to build out that shelf and make ever more space.
yeah, same. I just want to shout out real quick too. I mean, obviously, all the names you listed are incredible, and plus, you know, the names that we read growing up. But two particular names that, because I just know that you're a fan of them as well, I just wanted to talk about briefly. Obviously, you're doing an event tomorrow with our fellow buddy Jean Young Fraser, who wrote Pizza Girl. I love Jeannie. Hopefully, she wears that tracksuit at the event tomorrow. But also Patrick Cottrell, who
Yeah.
wrote Sorry, I'm suddenly blanking on the name. Sorry to Disrupt the Peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that book. And I did an interview with Patrick a couple years ago, and just also an incredible Korean American writer. Yeah, it's exciting. Like you said, it's exciting. I don't understand people that sort of view writing or publishing as a competition. Like, I'm so excited to see fellow Korean Americans, fellow AAPI writers, anybody who's like sort of the world is against us, you know what I mean? Marginalized in some way, where you're like fighting an uphill battle just to get published. Like, I'm rooting for them, you know? But yeah, to see fellow Korean Americans, like it's, I honestly like want to break out into tears, you know what I mean?
Yeah. We make our way and we find each other.
Yeah, for sure. There is a question, I think it's actually in the chat. I'm going to read it real quick. Robert says, it seems like the setting of Hawaii is as uniquely special as the events taking place in Korea. Could you picture the novel taking place in a different setting? Okay.
You know, I've always strived to return home in many ways. And I've also never felt at home growing up in Hawaii. And that's something that I really struggled with, not knowing if I was Korean enough, not knowing what it meant to be American, which is a more complicated positionality to have in Hawaii, which is illegally occupied by the US. And so, I wrote a book that ultimately was my way of honoring my genealogies to Korea and to a divided country, and to where I was raised and where I lived, and to honor the lands that fed me and nourished me and allowed me to grow and to become a writer. And it's that living that continues to inform my being a writer to this day. And I feel more committed than ever to write about Hawaii and to write about Korean experiences there in relation to these struggles that persist today regarding protecting our water from leaking fuel tanks and from desecration and further destruction on these lands that are dominantly upheld as a fantasy for relaxation. But war is ever present in both Korea and Hawaii, and in insidious ways it's always lurking in the background and reaching into our bodies and affecting our health, not only our health but the health of our entire planet. So I wrote as a way to bring these two places together in the world of nuclear family, and my fiction has become my home, and it's a place that I am happy to bring folks to then think about, to ask them to think about your own connections to the communities around you and the lands in which you live.
Yeah, that's great, Joseph. Maybe one more quick thing. Just because as you were speaking, I thought it might be a great opportunity to just kind of talk about like what's going on with the Red Hill situation, just because I think a lot of people don't know, and obviously you just kind of alluded to it right now. So maybe if you just want to finish up by like speaking briefly on that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So yeah, there's still over 100 million gallons of jet fuel stored in a facility that's buried underground uphill from Pearl Harbor. That's right above Oahu's main drinking aquifer. And it's already been contaminated by jet fuel. And despite getting an order to defuel those tanks by the Department of Defense, the Navy is dragging on its timeline and has not even presented yet a plan for defueling and decommissioning the whole facility. And these tanks are super old. They're built in the 1940s. They've leaked over 70 times. One really big spill happened in a number of years ago. And even though activists were calling for the shutdown of the facility then, the Navy insisted on its importance to national security. And so we're kind of held hostage by this bottom line, and the fate of drinking water, clean drinking water for future generations is left to these larger whims that value war over our health and the health of future generations. And folks back home right now are constantly struggling and working to inform the community that it's not over until those tanks are dry. And in writing a book about Hawaii, I found it my responsibility to always bring it back to that central issue, especially when talking about the Korean War and its division, because Korea's division and militarization is directly linked with the occupation of Hawaii. And they both go hand in hand for the same reasons, for US exerting its global dominance as an empire of bases across the world. But yeah, that's what we face going forward, and it's something that I hope everyone will consider when they drink water and think about what's worth protecting.
Great, great, thanks. That's so powerful. I know you've been, you know, vigilant for the cause, obviously. Yeah, again, like, this is just a small snapshot into the book. It's so rich and funny and heartbreaking and heartfelt. Please pick it up, and please also, again, seek out Joseph's other interviews, because he'll just drop just incredible tidbits of information in each one of them. So we appreciate y'all being here tonight. Thanks to Powell's, and again, thanks to Joseph.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shane. I've been looking forward to this for a super long time, and yeah, I feel like writing this book was just an excuse to meet a writer like you and to commune over the occasion of our shared love for our stories and our people and the stories that are yet to be told from us and future writers.
Thank you both so much for being here, and thanks for your conversation. And yeah, I want to encourage everyone to go out there and get the Nuclear Family book, and also check out Gene's book as well, Ricky. So, and I put a link in the chat right now for those, and you, and also the link to watch this presentation again if you like. It'll be on YouTube in about a week, so feel free to check it out again. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. Thank you both so much again, and for having you both with us today. So, all right, night everyone. Thanks so much.